Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the first week of our new series, Bless. A series focused around relational evangelism. A series where we're looking at 5 everyday ways to love your neighbor and change the world. Now, when you hear the term evangelism, you might feel a bit conflicted. You probably feel that your faith, has made a difference in your life and that, you believe it could help others. But for some reason, whenever you present the gospel, maybe you're like me, you kind of feel like a used car salesman or that you're part of some kind of pyramid scheme. As Canadians, we tend to be very humble, tolerant, and diplomatic. It's why the idea of asserting our beliefs onto another person makes many of us feel uncomfortable. And thankfully, though, there is a way for us to engage in effective witness without us having to radically change our personality or our nationality. And it's actually so simple and straightforward that all of us can do it in our everyday lives. It's called the Bless strategy, and we find its origins all the way back in the book of Genesis. When God was speaking to Abram, the very first missionary, this is what he said. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, he says, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you." And he continues, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." That one word bless is repeated 5 times in those last 2 verses. God says, "I will bless you." He says, "You will be a blessing." He says, "I will bless those who bless you. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." And what we see is that God's very first strategy for reaching the world was blessing. We see this right here in Genesis 12. God commissioned Abram to leave his home and go start a new nation. God said he was going to richly bless Abram relationally and financially and spiritually. But the point of that blessing was not simply for Abraham to be the recipient of that blessing. The point of the blessing for Abraham and for all who followed him, including Jesus and us, was that we would be blessed to be a blessing. That we would be blessed to be a blessing to other people. Did you know that there are 395 passages throughout Scripture that either paraphrase or abridge the passage we just read, Genesis 12? 395 passages woven throughout the Old and the New Testament. Often we think that God's mission to save the world started when Jesus came to earth, or when maybe Jesus commissioned his followers to go and make disciples. But the truth is that God is a missionary God, and he had the same mission for his people way back in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, as he does for us today. And there's no better model for what it looks like to go and bless than Jesus. His entire life was a blessing. The Gospels give us numerous examples of how Jesus blessed the people he encountered. Now, with that in mind, there are a couple of pastors in the States. They're actually 2 brothers. Their names are Dave and John Ferguson. And so 30 years ago, they planted a church in Chicago, which they still lead. And they also lead a global church planting movement called New Thing. These 2 brothers spent some time studying the life of Jesus to see if there was maybe some recurring patterns in how he befriended and blessed the people in his life. The more they combed through the Gospels, the more they began to see some simple practices that Jesus routinely employed. And so they made a list of all of those simple practices, and they narrowed it down to the top 5 that they believe people, like me and you, can do on a regular basis. After they identified the top 5, they focused on making those things simple and unforgettable. And so they came up with the acronym BLESS. The B stands for begin with prayer. The L stands for listen, the E stands for eat, the S stands for serve, and the second S stands for story. This week, Pastor Nate tackled the first simple practice modeled in Jesus' life, which is begin with prayer. Dave Ferguson writes this. He says, "I cannot change the world. You cannot change the world. Even prayer alone doesn't change the world. Only God can change the world. However, God uses prayer to change us, and then God uses us to change the world." That's the power of prayer. God uses prayer to change us, and then God uses us to change the world. And so the first step to a relational evangelism, the first step to being a blessing, is to pray for people. What if instead of waiting for God to grab our attention, we were intentional about giving it to him? What if each day we began with a prayer to be a blessing to the people around us and ask God to help us see the divine appointments that He has set along our path? Prayer is both how you discover your mission and how you pursue it. Take the life of Jesus, for example. Prayer was not only the way that Jesus began His day, it was how He began His whole ministry. In Luke chapter 3, we read of how Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River, and a voice from heaven said, "You are my beloved Son, dearly loved Son, and you bring me great joy." It was God the Father commissioning Jesus for His public ministry. We then read in chapter 4 how Jesus was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where He fasted and prayed for 40 days. 2 chapters later, when Jesus was getting ready to select those who would join Him on His mission, we read the following in Luke chapter 6, verse 12. It says, Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and He prayed to God all night. At daybreak, He called together all of His disciples and chose 12 of them to be His apostles. Jesus spent the night in prayer before deciding on the 12 that He would invest His life into in discipling. The stakes were high. These 12 would be the first ones He would bless with His life, and together they would form a community of friendship. And once they were ready, Jesus would send them out to bless the world. Now, you may be thinking, why does Jesus need to pray if He's God? Well, one of the primary reasons is that Jesus lived His life as an example for how we should live ours. And so Jesus wanted us to know that we need to begin with prayer. Yet, despite its importance, prayer is one of those things, it's kind of like flossing or exercise that we know we should do, but we don't do it often enough. Why is that? Well, for some, it's because they never really maybe learned how to pray. For others, it's because maybe they're too busy. And for others, it's because they're not convinced that prayer even actually works. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we don't pray, but Nate challenged us that if we're going to engage in the mission God has for our lives, it actually begins with prayer, and we can't skip it. In prayer, we open ourselves to God and to the leading of His Spirit. In prayer, we focus our minds to recognize His promptings. And in prayer, we receive the direction we need to discover the people that God is calling us to bless. Here's the reality. There are people you come across every day who have never once had someone pray for them. They didn't grow up in a Christian home. They didn't have Christian family members. They don't go to church. No one has ever prayed for them. But God has placed them across your path. And as you take time each day to pray, He's going to bring them to your mind, and you're going to be able to begin the process of blessing them simply by praying for them. Well, friends, consider yourselves caught up. Enjoy working through the discussion questions, and remember, you've been blessed to be a blessing.